What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's hop right into it. So our first story is about OpenClaw / ClaudeBot. I don't think we've covered it on the show yet because I just felt at first that it was kind of a fad, but over the past week, I've really been enlightened into how powerful it can be, just seeing my colleagues using it and also some people on Twitter. And just a quick explainer is essentially what it is a gateway / server that runs essentially on top of Claude, or I think you can bring other APIs, but at the very least it runs on Claude code for sure. So you can utilize like the max plan for that. And it basically is just an assistant that kind of has a harness built around it. So it kind of understands that what it is, and it has like an identity and a soul, and you can talk to it and it can access your computer wherever you run it. And it can kind of operate as more like an agent, like we're all trying to achieve the goal of Jarvis from Iron Man. This is like one step closer to that as like a personal on computer agent. You can tell it to do different things. You can connect it to multiple different communication platforms, so like you can text it, but I was texting it with my own number and it was really bad because it was double texting, and then I got it caught in a loop with the commands. But then I moved it over to Discord, which is dope, but then the only security risk is like if my Discord gets hacked, then someone can access my OpenClaw. So you got to be very careful about these things and be smart about it, and that's why there's like these sandbox VMs as well that you can run it in. But it is a really cool technology. It does pass the smell test. There was like this social media platform where people had their agents or like their personal AI assistants chatting with each other. It was called like Moltbook, and it went super viral, but then it disappeared. And there was also a huge data leak as well, including like API keys from it. So I don't know where it's at now. And those things I felt like were kind of a waste of time. They're just cool toys, I guess, that you can look at it experimenting with. But in terms of delivering real value, this does have real value. You essentially get the Claude app or the ChatGPT app or whatever, the communication through any platform that you want. And it also can utilize file systems. It can create apps. It can do all these different things. So definitely something to check out. And there have been a few vulnerabilities that have been caught as well. So that's why I'm doing this tweet, which talks about the new security hardening with the beta, and you can essentially just like ask Claude Code to set it up for you with the new version. But definitely something interesting to look into, and just make sure that you set it up safely and, ask Claude to do some research on your behalf. Next, we have a tweet from Theo just saying, he's basically talking about a greenfield project. We'll go into the specifics, but he's saying that Opus 4.6 doesn't seem to be doing as well. And he's like, I don't know what they did, but this is borderline unusable. There's also a reply to this tweet from NeetCode where he's saying like, I don't understand how they don't test these regressions. So we have talked about in the past, I forget the guy's name. I think it was like Tariq or something, but he works for Anthropic, and he has said multiple times that they do not sample the models in any way. They don't make them worse purposely to like save compute or anything. That may be a lie, but he was on the record about that on Twitter. But as you can see here, he's working on this T3 Chat Premium sandbox, I guess, where he's experimenting. And it created a project with a send.js, and it needed a resend secret key. And he just says, don't forget to use .env, and then it adds .env, but it doesn't add a package JSON after. So he's just kind of having to guide it along and kind of frustrated about that. I feel like for a greenfield, you still want to ask Claude to like use a starter, right? And that would usually include like a package JSON and like packages that you care about. Maybe he wants something super lean for some reason, or he just wants like the .js file, or he just had it for some reason out the gate. But that's what I'd recommend for that. But it is interesting because like I also feel like I've noticed that Opus 4.6, especially like yesterday, was not as good as it had been previously, and that does seem to be a recurring thing. And I'm always like, maybe it's me. And this is also what Reese Sullivan says, who I think works at Vercel now, on domains. He used to work at Microsoft. He's just like a Twitter guy as well. But he also like mentions that like maybe it's him, where he's like overthinking the prompts and the responses potentially, now that he's more aware of the models, like pros and cons, which is also how I'm feeling because, they say that they haven't changed it at all. But nonetheless, I do notice it, and it is interesting to like kind of be vindicated that on Twitter other people are noticing as well. So I don't know. People are saying Codex 5.3 is really good. I used it briefly, but I don't move around models as quickly as other people do. That might be a flaw, but I was on Cursor Auto for a really long time before Claude Code, so I wasn't really like super picky about my models. But maybe moving forward, I do need to be, and I should try out Codex, and I have heard a lot of good feedback. So maybe something to look into. So next we have a tweet from Jason Fried, I believe is how you say his name. He's business partners with DHH and working on Basecamp and Hey and their new like Kanban once. And he's saying that he's never argued with an AI like he's argued with a person, and that's why he loves working on products with people. He talks about how they have different points of view and they're backed up by different reasons. And he likes that going through that kind of polishes the product. And he says like some of his favorite moments are arguing with DHH, where they disagree the most, but what comes out of these sessions is not bitterness, but betterment. And, just kind of saying like how he likes working with humans more. And I find it interesting. I do really like working with humans, and I do like the way that certain people approach problems. And I think that a lot of people, based on their different backgrounds, can provide a lot of flexibility and a lot of interesting points that you wouldn't think about when working with them. So that's why it is good to kind of like get, RFCs, like requests for comments, and being able to like communicate freely about these different things so you can have people's different perspectives as opposed to just kind of like approving and moving on. But I do feel like as well, it is sometimes hard to get on the same page with people as to like what we're exactly discussing. And like, okay, we're going on this specific point. So like, let's talk about the pros and cons of this point, and like kind of come to a conclusion. Whereas like, I feel like it's pretty common, at least in my experience, maybe it's something that I need to work on, but where I'll be like arguing these things and I'll be like, okay, let's go over the specific reason that this is better than this. But I feel like sometimes people will just like want to give up on the argument and be like, you know what, it doesn't matter. Let's just move forward with this. And it's like, I don't even care about the proposal that I have, like I just want to kind of understand what metrics and what values we're using to make these decisions. But I feel like sometimes with people, it's not so easy to come to those conclusions or kind of understand those trade-offs that we're working with. Whereas like with AI, you can kind of steer it to work however you best think, or how you best communicate. So obviously there's going to be some sycophancy and it's going to agree with you more often than not. But I do kind of feel like sometimes like I can actually learn a lot quicker when going through with AI as opposed to like being stuck on specific problems that aren't being able to move forward when working with humans. Okay, next we have a kind of podcast story, so I can't go too deep because this is such a big podcast, but Dwarkesh Patel, who's one of the most known podcasters, he's had like Elon, Sam Altman, every single person's been on his podcast. I think he's even published a book through Stripe. I think I've even talked about that in a story before, but he interviewed Dario, who is the CEO of Anthropic, which runs the Claude model, and they just raised a $30 billion round at a valuation of $380 billion, which we covered as well. And there's a ton of points in the podcast. You'll have to watch it if you really want to go deep. I thought it was pretty fascinating just to see them kind of debating back and forth, but it is a lot of kind of like virtue signaling, as these AI CEOs love to do. They don't like to make any specific points, which I guess I understand if you have so many billions of dollars riding on every word you say. But there was an interesting piece in this specific moment that got captured in this tweet, which is where Dario's saying, we're going to have a country of geniuses in data centers essentially, and like just the intelligence is growing. So Dwarkesh basically calls him out and is like, if you think that the intelligence is going to reach such an abnormal level, why aren't we investing in $5 trillion of compute, and they're doing 300 billion of compute per year in 2 years is what it says here. And he's essentially like, we're leveraged so high that we can't take on any more. If we miss like one quarter, we miss 1 year, then we're going to go completely bankrupt, which is very interesting. Like, I wonder what the cost calculation there is. Like, is it based on delivering specific models and revenue goals, or is it based on some kind of like specific intelligence metric that has to be reached to essentially make it worth it in terms of growth? I don't know the exact market penetration of all these different products, but I know that Claude is severely underpenetrated compared to ChatGPT. I believe Sam, during the beef around the Super Bowl ad, he said ChatGPT has more users in Texas than Anthropic has, period, and also that it's like only for the rich. But I also saw an interesting tweet in the reply here that was kind of like, Dario is very focused on being risk averse, right? Like, he doesn't want to make anything that's too rash of a decision and wants to kind of understand the safety implications of all these things. But it's also like, if you really think that this level of intellect and AGI is essentially coming, then it's also a safety decision and a risk decision not to invest 5 trillion in a compute as well. So just something interesting and, kind of higher level than like the stuff I'm working on, but, something to keep in touch with, especially as the world is changing so frequently based on these updates that are coming from these models. Okay, next we have a tweet from Dax talking about kind of the realities of coding in the AI world, and kind of people's like rose-colored glasses understandings versus like the reality. So he's saying, everyone's talking about their teams like they were at the peak of efficiency and bottlenecked by ability to produce code. Here's what things actually look like. Your org rarely has good ideas. Ideas being expensive to implement was actually helping. I don't agree with that. There is a guy in the reply who I follow, I think his name's like David Piano or something, and he agreed with that point, but I actually think being able to run experiments and being able to develop things and iterate faster is actually a great idea. And as long as you can safely tear things down, which is kind of a point to coding reliability and modularization, and also just having good review and practices and how foundational coding is so important. He says majority of workers have no reason to be super motivated. They want to do their 9 to 5 and get back to their life. This is 100% true. My thesis, and it's kind of an obvious thesis, but I know a lot of developers disagree with it, but convenience will be over everything. People don't care about security. They don't care about going above and beyond most of the time. They just want to have convenience, which is totally understandable. We don't want to expend energy where we don't have to. It's just part of evolution and keeping safe and happy, even though obviously we need to push ourselves to accomplish great things to really have a fulfilling life, but you kind of have to activate like the prefrontal cortex to make that happen. And then leading on with that point as well, he says they're not using AI to be 10 times more effective. They're using it to churn out their tasks with less energy spend, kind of the same point. And the 2 people on your team that actually tried it are now flattened by the slop code everyone is producing. They will quit soon. That I haven't seen. I feel like it's actually, for me, really strengthened my code review ability with how much code is being produced and really being like, okay, what do I actually care about in the style guidelines here, and making sure that's reflected in the Claude.md so it won't happen again. So I actually am more fired up than ever, even when I'm reviewing code that I feel like is not necessarily the nicest. It's like really helping me refine my understanding of what clean code is, And then he says, even when you produce work faster, you're still bottlenecked by bureaucracy and the dozens of other realities of shipping something real. This is totally true. I do think, though, that being able to produce code faster has been a huge level up, and I'm sure he agrees with that as well. But definitely the piece of like taking some code that was written by AI and confirming that it's valid, making sure it passes PR review, making sure you run it against tests, and you have your coverage and all these different things, and you have like a demo from Loom or whatever, that's where like the real magic happens. But then when you can really like refine that process, and especially if you're focused on one project at once, which I'm really trying to preach these days, then you can really speed it up a lot with AI for sure, especially like being tapped in and making sure that you have a review process that goes through. And that'll be similar to the cursor story that we cover in a second. Okay, so the next story is just kind of another page in the saga of will vibe coding replace all SaaS? And the answer is obviously no. People want convenience more than anything, like we talked about previously. People always want to sign in with Google. They don't want to install some self-hosted crap that they have to maintain and take care of. They just want things to work and be able to pay money for reduced liability and increased responsiveness and customer support, etc. And so I don't know where this blog is coming from exactly, or this tweet from Zara, but essentially there's this quote here which says that an unusual part of OpenAI is that everything, and I mean everything, runs on Slack. There's no email. I maybe received 10 emails in my entire time there. Then he talks some more about like being organized and all that, but it is very interesting to see that OpenAI runs everything on Slack. Slack actually is so fascinating to me. I really don't think it's going to be replaced just because they have so many different intricate tools. Like you have the collab channels with different companies, which people love. Obviously, you can do that with email, or you can do that with Discord, but people really like the way that Slack has it set up. They have all these different like notification pieces, all these like VIPs of like who can reach out to you at certain times. So I actually think Slack is not going to be replaced. All the tools that build Slack integrations are going to be very easy to adopt, which is kind of almost a non-starter now in B2B SaaS. And yeah, just something interesting. There's always going to be these different tools you'll have to set up for your company. You're not going to be able to vibe code everything yourself, even though there is a book by the Twilio CEO who was saying things like this in like 2020. So definitely could be an interesting book to read and see if things have changed in the age of AI. But convenience and product focus are more important than ever. Next, we have a pretty cool announcement. I forgot to cover it. I guess it was yesterday. It feels like so long ago. But GitHub has now announced that you can have pull requests limited to repo collaborators or disabled entirely. So this has kind of been also another piece of the ongoing saga of all these big open source projects shutting down new contributions from users in general because they didn't have this feature at the time. But essentially there was just way too much AI slop contributions going into these projects, so the reviewers didn't even have enough time to just close them immediately, so they just stopped accepting contributions altogether. But now GitHub has heard the feedback. Jared Palmer, who used to be at Vercel, he's the senior VP of GitHub, I guess, and VP of Core AI at Microsoft. And now you can have this feature where you can just only allow collaborators to make new pull requests. So something to keep in mind if you run an open source project. It was cool to see from NeetCode as well. He talks about improving the PR UI, which I definitely agree with. It's so trash, especially on mobile as well. You can't even use it essentially. He's saying at Google there's some project called Critique, I guess, which is like their own PR reviewer. So that could be really interesting to kind of see what that looks like and maybe get some improvements there in GitHub. I know we had the old GitHub CEO who founded his own replacement, and people are kind of eyeing them, especially because they've had some reliability issues over the past couple weeks. But at least they are responding to feedback and launching new features, and they do have a really big moat, but Git itself at least is open source, so anyone can implement on top of that protocol, and that's what's so sick about all this stuff. Next, we have a tweet from Paul Copplestone, I think is how you say his name, who is the CEO of Supabase, which is extremely popular for people vibe coding, especially people getting new into launching products, because it's kind of like a Firebase replacement, which is what people used to use like about 10 years ago, like when I was first getting started. And it was essentially kind of like an open source Firebase replacement because Google owns Firebase and it was super closed source. It was kind of outdated. And so all these people moved to Supabase, which had Postgres out the box. It had row level security, so you could actually connect to the database from the client and skip the hop to the backend entirely. And also they gave you object storage and database all included in one package in real time. But recently they've kind of lost their credibility, not for this specific issue, which we'll hop into right now, but just kind of like from a brand perspective, I guess people haven't really been liking them. I never really liked them. And also a lot of people make security mistakes with the row level security. So essentially the database would just be completely pwned because the client had full access and they didn't like secure the rows specifically based on parameters correctly. But nonetheless, yesterday they had an outage for basically 4 hours. We don't need to read all of this stuff in the tweet. They had an outage for 4 hours, which was essentially caused by a bad infrastructure push to their AWS, which basically blocked all public internet access on their VPC, which is like their virtual private cloud inside of AWS. So essentially hosting all of their services on US East 2 were completely down. As you can see here in the reply tweet, 3 hours and 42 minutes, affecting 5% of customers. But definitely people were super pissed on Twitter. They also had a tweet go out that was kind of like a marketing tweet, so people were super mad about that, and they didn't post anything on Twitter about the outage. But people were pissed. Everyone's like, okay, I need to move off Supabase. It would made a ton of news, which I totally understand, for these database things and these core infrastructure things. It's like you do kind of want to be bleeding edge, but it's also like if your database is down, your app is down, and your customers who are paying you are going to be pissed. Like there's no way around it, especially if AWS isn't down as a whole. That's kind of a whole nother level where it's like people are kind of okay with it because everyone's down. But when you're just down by yourself, it's very problematic, and the database is obviously the most important piece of the application. So they said a ton of things about how they're going to improve their process and all that, and you can use Supabase if you want. I'm not really mad at it. I'm a huge Convex fan personally right now. There's pros and cons, obviously, because you don't get Postgres on Convex. You kind of have to use their database and their systems and their transactions, but it does make transactions a lot cleaner. But just last piece on this story as well is that Sam, who's the CEO of PlanetScale, which is another database company, they don't do like the whole platform like Supabase does. They're very focused on like the MySQL, and now they've also launched Postgres. But he was going through tweets and just roasting Supabase super hard. He was saying they're like irresponsible for lying essentially about their reliability to try and get customers. He was saying anyone who emails us will help you like do a lift and shift with the white glove service for free. So he was definitely taking advantage of that, and he felt no moral qualms about it. I don't think PlanetScale is going to go down, and it's definitely like a reliability lesson that we can learn from them in terms of how well they're operating their service. But definitely seemed like he was going crazy with that, and props to him. I guess he's running a better database company than Supabase. Okay, last story of this episode has been a doozy, but so here we have a tweet from Eric from Cursor talking about agentic code owners. So he does talk about some very inside knowledge at Cursor, which is very sick, and just kind of general software engineering, I guess. But in my experience, just only working in startups, I never really got like put on exactly to like code owners and pull request reviews and CI and CD and all these important things. I kind of had to figure it out on my own as I went along, especially when I didn't have big engineering teams. It's like there wasn't a lot of review that could be done, and it was all about velocity as opposed to security and safety. It's just about getting the features out as much as possible, because we were like, oh, well, if the project doesn't work, or like if we can't validate that people care about this, why even care about the security? Now in hindsight, like anything I work on, I feel like is going to have users at this point. So I do make sure to do things right from the beginning. But nonetheless, let's hop into this topic. So what he's proposing here, and what Cursor has essentially invented, is that they have an agent now, an internal system that reads each PR and estimates risk. It's kind of similar to Graphite, which I believe they acquired. So this could be kind of Graphite getting integrated into the Cursor system. But you can see here's an example where they have Cursor approving changes, which I believe would enable them to merge. And it says the risk level is low. It's just optional stuff, UI changes, good error handling, no infrastructure auth billing or security impact. So those are definitely good things to keep aware of. And If it's high, it'll send it to the right reviewer. So that's also cool, like having code owners directly in the code. I don't think I have that on any of my repos, but definitely something to implement, and also speaks to like how in the age of AI, using the tools that have existed for so long and the best practices that we have for solving some of these problems are now even more possible with super small teams because of the power of AI. And the last piece as well is they have like this break glass merge, where essentially if you need something to get merged quickly, which can happen, especially if people take a while to review, I can definitely be blamed for that. Sometimes it takes me a while to review people's PRs, or, I'll leave a comment that takes a while to get merged or something. So you can just add the bot and force merge it and explain the reason why it's safe. So, something cool. I don't know exactly how you can like integrate this directly into your own code, but there is the prompt here that you can just copy, I guess, if you want to check out this tweet. And it's just interesting, because we talk about how code review is still kind of like the main human synchronous piece that's blocking just like a ton of velocity, right? Like you can generate as much code as possible, but until it gets merged into prod, it's essentially pointless. So this is kind of another step forward on that topic. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but I've just been going crazy on this episode. If this kind of stuff interests you and you want to talk with some like-minded people, join the Audinato Discord in the description. Thanks.